Hi. So today I'm going to talk about Henry VII and his finances. And was he really a miser king? Well, let's see. Well, first of all, Henry, when he came to the throne, he had to deal with quite a few problems. So, first one was England had very poor economy and poor finances. Well, he firstly used the royal council, which met when the king needed. So there were no written rules, and it was basically at the king's control. He controlled it. He decided when they would meet. They did whatever he wanted. Not what they didn't discuss everything he wanted. They discussed other matters, but they met whenever the king wished for. He also made sure that the crown had annual income, that money was flowing into the kingdom, and that the money was carefully accounted for. So if we contrast Henry VII and Henry VIII, Henry VII, he was this man who really liked personal rule, not in the sense of authoritarian figure. That was more Henry VIII. I'm saying he was this man who liked to be there, manage the finances. Yeah, basically hands-on. He liked the boring stuff. Henry VIII would go on to leave this boring stuff to Wolsey and his other chief ministers. So yeah, Henry VII, he made sure everything coming into the kingdom was accounted for. Yeah, like I said, he took a direct personal interest in finances, even bringing it to his chamber. So he would come in and be like, okay, finances. And maybe his wife's like, hey, Henry, can we talk? And Henry's like, I'm sorry, dear, I'm doing finances. Let me be. So he was kind of obsessed with finances. He really liked having the control. Well, he established new posts. For example, the surveyor of the king's wards, which investigated cases of debt to the king. So if someone owed a debt to Henry, especially regarding to wardships, that would go straight to this council. Then the Court of Audit, which monitored government spending. So if they wanted to fund, I don't know, official government place, I don't know, something of government, this Court of Audit would administer it and make sure it was being properly used, instead of just uselessly buying things the crown doesn't really need. Henry VII was a really clever guy. He doesn't get the appreciation he deserves. He was very smart. I personally think much smarter than Henry VIII. Well, he knew that the reason the country was in such economic chaos was because of the Wars of the Roses. The wars naturally destroyed a country's economy. So Henry did not do that many wars. He did not abstain from participating in foreign policy, but he did not actually fight and provoke war. I'll eventually do a video on Henry VII's foreign policy so you can see, but it's so much shorter than Henry VIII. My Henry VIII one is almost an hour long. This one, it would be so much shorter. So he wasn't that aggressive. His main aim in foreign policy, as you'll probably see, would be to establish a monarchy and a dynasty, and become accepted worldwide. Henry VIII had already had that, so he was focusing on war with France, as you probably know. Well, he exploited rights and claimed special payments from nobles. So, much like today, everything you had to pay. There was tax for that. In England, not in the colonies, because this was before the discovery of America. This was 1485, and that would not be for another 7 years. So, but he did tax quite a few things. If you wanted to get married, you needed to pay a tax. If you wanted to inherit, you needed to pay a tax. If you wanted to die, when you died, you had to pay a tax. Not you, your family. But there was a tax for everything. If they sold the treasury, they thrived in this period because everything went to the treasury. and also kept people thinking, oh right, it's the crown who's in control, not some weird noble. No, it's the crown. Well, there were some claims that he needed, for example, if this really powerful noble wanted to inherit his father's money or whatever, and he's like, I don't want a tax, but without this one noble, he couldn't really rule properly. Well, he would make an exception. So whenever necessary, he would overlook claims, but he mostly was quite strict with that. They actually call him kind of a tyrant, especially in dealing with the nobles. That's another deal. That's something for another video. But he was kind of like in the middle, in the start and end of his reign, very, very tough. He always spent money. Apart from the fact that he saved it for the crown, he wanted to enhance the idea of a king, of a monarch. So, for example, his coronation and the wedding, they went all out. It was so expensive, and he spared no expense because to him, finances are important, but you need a strong image of a king, and in order to do that, you need to impress the people. How do you impress the people? By spending money. So whenever he wanted to enhance the image of a monarch, he would spend a lot of money. By the end of the reign, especially after the death of Arthur in 1501, if I'm not mistaken, and of Elizabeth in 1502, I think, 1503, they were really close together, 1 or 2 years apart. Well, he becomes much more paranoid, so he has a stricter control over the money, in the later years of his reign, especially the last 7 years. And mainly because, he was obsessed with collecting money, ensuring it was being handled properly, but also because he knew his health was not that good. He wouldn't die until 1509, but he wanted to make sure his son, because Arthur had died, his son Henry would have strong enough finance for when he became king. So he wanted to make his life easier, which he did. And Henry's economy at the beginning was really, really good, thanks to Henry VII, not the 8th. Then at the end of his reign, it's chaotic because of the wars and the debasement. But anyway, and income of England became 20 times more than the income of the highest and wealthiest nobles. However, it was still less than the King of France. But considering that the country, France, it was not, I'm not saying that France was always at peace, no, but England had just suffered through Wars of the Roses, and the economy was in chaos, and here comes this guy who kills the king. He has no direct claim to the throne, and he has, but it's kind of really not that strong. So here comes this guy and kills the king, becomes king himself, manages the finances in such a way that he becomes 20 times wealthier than the wealthiest nobles. So you can't say he wasn't effective. So, I mentioned how the finances and the economy was kind of in chaos by the time Henry came to the throne. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, at first, I'm going to explain these two systems. Henry used an exchequer system. I'm going to explain it in a bit, which meant that he only made, in the beginning, 12,000 pounds from crown lands. It's 12,000 pounds. It's not nothing. But Richard III, his predecessor, had made 25,000, so it wasn't even halfway. So Henry's like, it's not good enough. He didn't know that much about finances, so he took it home with him, the finances to learn and to manage, but he knew he wasn't the world's expert. He knew he wasn't the person who knew the most about this. So he appointed people who knew about this and knew how to manage things. Then he later on got the hang of it, but at the beginning, he was smart. He said, okay, I'm not the best person at this, but this guy is. Let's use him. Well, for the coronation, the marriage that I mentioned, he had loans as well as for suppression of rebellions in the north, and also when he did a royal progress, because when he got crowned, he went around England saying, hey, look, I'm your new king. Oh yeah, they went around, and for that, he needed money, so he asked for loans. But again, he did not force money out of nowhere. In 1487, he wanted to be for a feast, but the crown's finances were not that great. So there was not enough money, so they didn't do the feast. That was sensible enough of him. Henry VIII probably would have found money elsewhere. But Henry VII, like, okay, yeah, okay, not enough money. It's fine, we won't have it. We'll save it for some time else. He knew he had to keep an eye on finances. He didn't want them going out of control. He didn't want the country descending into economic chaos. So what did he do? He changed from the exchequer system that he used at the beginning to the chamber system. So when the chamber system and the exchequer system, when were they used? Well, the one was for the exchequer, it was beyond the reign of Edward IV. If you don't know who Edward IV was, he was the brother to Richard III. So I think it's Henry VI. He dies. I'm not that strong on the Wars of the Roses, but I think, I may be wrong, Henry VIII dies and Edward IV inherits the throne. Edward, he reigns, but then he suddenly dies and leaves young Richard V. Young Edward V and his brother Richard in charge, Edward being king. Here comes Richard, like, hey, I'm your uncle, I'm regent, so I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to put you both in the Tower of London, and you're going to stay there. Don't worry, it's for your safety. The princes would go on to disappear. It's said that they're called the princes in the tower. We don't really know what happened to them. Richard probably had them killed. Richard III came. So that's so beyond the reign of Edward IV, it's when the exchequer system was being used. Really provided for Richard. The chamber system was developed by Edward IV and Richard III, but not really used. So they used the exchequer system, which was already in place. It was established. It was all good, but the chamber system was being developed slowly. Well, what was the purpose of these systems? Well, with the exchequer, they collect money from property, taxes, and customs. Basically, collect money. That's it. The chamber is practically the same thing. It's basically a way of collecting money, so there's not much of a difference. The exchequer system was officials in charge of collecting the money. So you had this guy who was in charge of collecting the money and then passing on to the state. In the chamber system, it was under direct supervision of the king. So, as I said, the king had much more of a hands-on approach when it came to finances. The advantages of the exchequer system was that it was accurate, tried and tested. It had been in place for I don't know how many years, but quite a few. So it's proven to work. However, it was slow. It didn't deal with cash. It was just finances on paper. So none of the how much imports, yeah, but not day-to-day commerce. No. However, then came the chamber system, which it gave the most profit. It was part of the household, and it was faster. So there's not really any disadvantages to complain about. So those are the ways Henry collected money. How did he, that was the way, but how did he get the money? Not collect it for the crown. How did he actually collect it? If that makes any sense. So that's the ways that were collected. These are the actual facts, if that makes any sense. Well, they used firstly, sorry about that. Every single video she does that. I'm sorry. Well, the crown lands, first, they were the most important source of income. The land was crucial for regular revenue in Tudor times. So, of course, if the land is the most important thing for you to get your money, you're going to want more land, so you're going to want expansion. And this is the case all throughout the Tudor period, from Henry VII all the way to Elizabeth. So, but like, it's all, yeah, normally started with Henry. Well, he passed the Act of Resumption in 1486, which, if there was a land that had been lost since 1455, so 30 years prior to Henry's ascension to the throne, it was the crown's. So, say a noble had been killed fighting in the Wars of the Roses, and no one had claimed this land, and it was just there. Henry would march in and say, "Hey, hi, yes, that's mine." "No, it's not." "Yeah, it's fine. I passed an act of resumption. It's fine. Look." So that was an really easy way of collecting more money. He didn't always act on claims. So, of course, like I said before, if this noble really wanted this land and did not want to give it to Henry, well, Henry would usually say, no, you're gonna give me your land. Right? Yeah. But if this noble was really powerful and Henry could not do without him, well, it's like, okay, fine. I know I want your lands, you know I want your lands, but I'm not going to take them from you. So, you owe me. You owe me loyalty. I could have taken your source of income away. I didn't. So, there you go. So, he knew it was more useful to controlling potential threats rather than push forward. Again, Henry was obsessed with stability. Obsessed with stability and then their own legacy, but first of all, stability. He had to give lands to other people, so people he wanted to reward, gave them lands. Thing is, these people were loyal to him, so it wasn't that big of a deal, him giving them lands. Because he knew they would act on his behalf. It was a way of paying them, but also bribing them, if that makes sense. Well, Henry was actually kind of lucky. He did not have any close male relatives, so he did not have to give his land to other people. He gave land to his supporters, but not to his immediate family. So that was kind of a lucky strike. Oh, by the way, I said it wrong. Elizabeth of York did die in 1503, but Arthur died in 1502, not 1501. So 1502, death of Arthur. 1503, death of Elizabeth, so a year after her son, and then in 1509, Henry himself. But after the deaths of his wife and his son, the finances received a boost. Maybe, I don't know, because of pity or because he was more paranoid, so he taxed more. But they did receive a boost after they died. Well, of course, Henry won the Battle of Bosworth, so he could attain the nobles. Attaining is basically like punishing someone without a trial, only used in Tudor times and medieval times. It's a very wishy-washy definition. When I eventually make a video on how Henry VII dealt with his nobles, I'll define attainers better. But yeah, many nobles fought for Richard in the Battle of Bosworth. Richard was killed, so Henry's like, there's a lot of land of people who I know are gonna disobey whatever I say. You're not gonna be loyal, so I'm just going to attain their lands and claim their traitors, because he announced his reign began on the 21st of August of 1485, a day before the battle. So if anyone who fought against him, it would technically be fighting against the king, treason. So that was kind of a smart move, if I may say so myself. It was kind of smart. Well, he issued in his reign 138 attainders. 138. 46 of them were reversed. So he's like, okay, fine, you're gonna give me that. Oh, you're sorry. Oh, you say you'll do anything to get them reversed. Don't worry, I'll reverse them. Now you owe me. Again, this is how Henry dealt with nobles, but he did issue 138 attainders and reversed 46 of them. So he gained over 90, land up from 90 nobles. Not too bad, considering nobles owned quite a bit of land. How do you think Henry became 20 times wealthier than any other noble? He did this. Well, Henry wouldn't really know how to manage land. He did so correctly. He transferred control to surveyors and auditors who specialized in maximizing income. Like I said, he left the dirty work to people he could trust. So instead of doing it himself and appointing his friends, he knew, yeah, I can reward my friends, but if I do that and they're bad at their job, and the country's going to be in chaos. So he's going to appoint people who know what they're doing, and then, I don't know, appoint my friends in other places. Well, the receivers, another type of income, were accounted personally to the king's chamber. So this was another example of how Henry was hands-on. He took a personal interest into finances. Well, Crown lands gained £42,000 in 1508, the year prior to his death. So, considering at the beginning it was 12,000 and now it was 42,000. It's almost 4 times. Really impressive. Then he used bonds and recognizes, which controlled nobles as well as expanded his wealth. Again, this is subject for the video of Henry VII's nobility, but in short, bonds were a debt someone owed the king. Recognizes were official recognition of a previous debt. It makes sense. Recognizes. Recognition. Well, expenditure. I mean, Henry, he was kind of picky in what he did, but he knew he couldn't just let himself go. He had to become impressive, not only for his own people, but for other European countries. If this weak, dirty English king was there, he would be seen as no threat and would possibly be attacked. But with a strong image of a king, people would think twice. Well, the crown revenue of 113,000, which was crown worth, it was not a lot by European standards. France was off the charts by this point. It was not yet Louis XIV, the Sun King. It was before that, but still, France was way before that. This is even before Henry II. So, even before Louis VIII. It's like one of the Louis. It's way before the golden age of France and way before the French Revolution. But it was still, France was at least Europe's not, I don't know, the world maybe, but Europe's largest economy. How could he compete with that? Well, he needed to appear wealthy. So he needed to spend well. He couldn't just spend a lot, because maybe that would decrease his finances. He could just spend well. Spend money in what he knew he needed. So he impressed the Venetian ambassador. He made badges, flags, and banners personal to Henry. So basically a way to heighten the prestige. He lent to Philip of Burgundy. I have not mentioned this. I mentioned this in the rebellions video, the second video I ever did. But he lent Henry £138,000 to finance the Spanish voyage. He did pay Emperor Maximilian over £300,000. I mentioned this in the video as well. He never got paid back, but it increased his security. Because he knew Maximilian said, fine. Yeah. I'm not going to give you Philip. No. You think I'm going to give you Philip? No. But I want to tell you. Fine. So I bought security for the country. He was basically willing to get money by any means. He taxed for like rebellions in the north and in France, in the Brittany thing. Of course, this eventually led to the Yorkshire Rebellion, like relating to Brittany, and the Cornish Rebellion relating to Scotland. So again, I explained this in my video, but it was more of a money. I need money. And here lies a debate of was he a miser king? I will get to that after I finish explaining everything. So he did spend money to live as a king and have the image of a king. Like I said, only for appearances and for his personal prestige. Well, okay, that's how he got money. So where was this money coming from? What were the sources of crown revenue? Well, there's two types. There's ordinary and extraordinary. So the ordinary ones is the money that's collected quite regularly, and the extraordinary revenue is money only for certain extreme circumstances, extraordinary, but these require parliamentary approval. Well, crown lands, I already explained how crown lands were used. The next one is feudal dues, so the king could demand money. So because there was an idea that the king was in charge of all of England, so he technically owned all the land. Others were just tenants, or were just living in the king's land. So if he wanted to tax someone, he could tax someone. No problem. I mean, people rebelled against this, obviously, but that was the idea Henry went on. The types of relief was, this is why I said when there's a tax for everything. There was a relief tax paid by an heir to king when he inherited land. So if you were a guy in Tudor England, Henry Tudor VII, and your father died and you were the oldest, you would inherit the money. You need to pay some of that money to Henry. Marriage. Well, if two nobles wanted to get married, he'd say, okay, fine, yeah, he would approve of the marriage or not. If he approved it, like, okay, fine, yeah, you two would be a great couple. Okay, give me money. So it was basically a tax on marriage. This is kind of double set because he would have to approve of the marriage and then tax them. But yeah. Wardship. So if a father died and there was a child noble, he was like, don't worry, darling, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of your personal finances right now. I'm going to take care of your land. And then when you get older, you can reclaim this. Don't worry, it's fine. So that's wardship. However, of course, you were a young guy who just inherited his father's farm, say. Then you grew older, and then you went to Henry's like, hey, can I have my money? Can I have my land? He's like, yeah, of course, I promised you, didn't I? Don't worry, I am not going back on my word. However, there is a tax called livery. So if you want me, because I took care of your land, so for that, you're going to need to pay me. And of course, you said, no, not good. It was a tax for being a ward and a tax for taking back the land. And if you were to marry, another tax for that. Also, so if you were a ward, you had to pay the inheritance, the relief tax, and the wardship tax. It's kind of crazy. So, for example, as an example, the Earl of Northumberland died, and there was a 10-year-old in charge of the lands. Henry took over. In 1507, 2 years prior to Henry's death, income from marriage and wardships rose from 350 in 1487 to get this, in 20 years, just 20 years, to 6,000. Almost 20 times. 20 times. That's some good management right there. Again, another source of crown finance was customs. It was paid if any goods left the country, so to export goods, you need to pay Henry. To import goods, you needed to pay Henry. So anything, you need to pay Henry. And these customs duties were granted to Parliament by the king for life. So like, okay, if I'm not going to go into the crown for life, but you, yeah. So you can have these customs. Parliament's not as nice in 200 years later, well, less than 100 years later, with Charles I. Charles I. Yeah, Charles I. What I'm saying. Yeah, they have a really bad relationship. I am not going to get into that. I will eventually at one point do a video on this story. Well, there was money from tonnage and poundage. Tonnage, exports, poundage, imports. Especially really valuable goods like wool, wine, leather. So these goods, they needed, he especially taxed these, both tonnage and poundage. So he tried to increase trade, not because he wanted the country to have more international relationships. No. He did this to increase tax. So of course, he's like, okay, fine. You want to be more, to increase prestige, right? No other reason. We're just going to trade more with other countries. Better relationships. Right? Yeah, good. But no. He used this for tax. Big brain. It was really smart. And you can't deny, I honestly think Henry VII is one of the smartest, if not the smartest of the Tudors. Definitely smarter than Henry. Henry was not dumb, but he was lazy. So I think he was really smart, especially more than Henry. Then Edward was a kid. Mary, she did quite like a few things, but I don't know. He was kind of more secure, and Henry did, and thanks to Henry VII's establishment of the Tudor dynasty. And Elizabeth was really clever, so I think that the cleverest, the brightest Tudors were Henry VII and Elizabeth. Although, I mean, Elizabeth does, but Henry VII is often ignored. I remember my first textbook on the Tudors. It was a joint textbook with the Tudors and the Stuarts, and there was literally a single page on Henry VII. There were like 3 or 4 pages, 8 pages on Henry the 8th, 1 page on Edward, 1 page on Mary, and like 4 pages on Elizabeth. But it was like in year 4. But Henry VII just gets the mentions being the father to Henry the 8th. Anyway, I got distracted there. Well, these customs duties especially started after the reign of Edward IV and introduced certificates for coastal trade, and they updated the Book of Rates, which this book set out charges for specific items. Customs duties rose from 33,000 at the beginning of the reign to 40,000. 7,000 in customs. Quite impressive. Never mind the fact that he had already raised income from warships and that kind of deal. Yeah, he did that. He also managed to improve trade. Quite significant if it's a new monarch, new dynasty. And then legal dues were used to increase these with fines and retainers, so that's that. Money from fines and other payments were made by people appearing in court. And it was from common special law requests, law courts. A lot of money came from there, especially like attainders, like I said. And Sir William Stanley in 1495 paid £9,000 and then paid £1,000 per year. So William Stanley, I mentioned him in my rebellions video, but he was one of the supporters of fighting Warbeck. Not a strong supporter, but still. So that did not sit well with our dear Henry. Then, extraordinary revenue. Well, Again, like I said, emergencies only, and they needed parliamentary approval. So bonds and recognizes there were payments made as a guarantee of good behavior, and this was on the nobility. So not on average, it's a special thing. So of course, to use bonds and recognizes, Henry had to use Parliament. Well, it was demanded from those who mostly seemed disloyal, especially at the beginning, used on Yorkist supporters. It also was used by merchants who owned customs duties, and for example, the Earl of Westmoreland had to pay over £10,000 after the Battle of Bosworth. There was a court learned, which was to enforce these payments, especially to the king, not to the crown, not to the government, to the king. So again, bonds recognizes attainder. No taxes. Taxes didn't go through the council learned. This is more the nobility management. Yeah. And then he also used money through loans and benevolences. It was the king's right to ask for money in the case of emergency, right? It was. So he asked for loans through Parliament, organized by the Royal Council, and they requested these loans through individuals or institutions. So town corporations, that deal. They were not paid back. So yeah, this is true. So Henry's like, hey, hi, I kind of need a loan, right? Can you give me a loan? And the noble was like, oh yeah, of course, my liege. You're my king. Here's a loan, but you're gonna pay me back. And Henry's like, of course, I'm gonna pay you back. Fast forward, the lord's like, hey Henry, hi, I gave you a loan. Can I have it back? And Henry's like, how dare you demand something from the king? No. So the loans were never really paid back. I mean, some were, but not the majority. The council learned, they tried to enforce payments, and it was an irregular source of income because depending on the time, they needed more money, less money. So in 1491, they raised 48,000 country-wide for the Brittany War, and 9,000 of those pounds came from London. Well, then feudal dues. So almost the same thing as ordinary revenue, but only on special occasions. Well, if the king wanted a special occasion, say to knight his son or to go up and marry his daughter, well, he was entitled to gifts. So these gifts, the king's like, hey, I need to make a gift to my daughter. She's getting married. So these gifts were from the nobility and Parliament, and just if you were knighted, you had to pay the whole deal. And so nobles who did not want to pay were like, okay, I found a loophole in the system. I will not get knighted, and therefore I will not have to pay this tax. But he put more pressure on them because he knew they were trying to get out of paying. For example, Prince Arthur, he died in 1502, but Henry knighted him posthumously and paid £30,000. Where did he get this money from? Exactly, the nobility. Well, there was clerical taxes. Only taxes could be used on the church. These were not the same as normal taxes, so this is why they're in the extraordinary revenue column. Well, the clergy were exempt from main taxes. This was the only real tax coming from the church, and it was a voluntary gift. I say that in comments because I'm not that sure. Not that sure it was a voluntary gift. Well, so a way Henry got money was appointing members of the clergy. He had that power. He had that much power. So say you were this not archbishop, you were this poor priest who really wanted to become bishop. And Henry comes up to you and says, hey, I may or may not have a position of bishop opening. So, are you interested? And then the priest would be like, hell yeah. Like, not hell yeah, but yeah, please, yeah, I want to be bishop. How do I sign up? He's like, fine. You can give me money. For example, the Archdeacon of Buckingham had to pay £300, which nowadays it's still a lot of money, but back then it was a hell of a lot of money. But this way he got revenue. So the practice of simony was forbidden by the church, but still widely practiced. So that was another way. And Henry was not dumb. Then there was the parliamentary taxes. So in terms of war, there would be a special tax. Therefore, parliamentary tax. So he didn't want to ask Parliament for a grant. He was like, hey, I know if I ask Parliament, they're going to seriously judge me. They're going to be like, you're weak. And he did not want that. So, of course, he didn't go to Parliament like, hey, can you give me money? No, he cannot do it. So he's like, hey, can you tax the people for me? And Parliament's like, yeah, no problem. Don't worry. He's not taxing us. So we do not need to worry. So these taxes eventually resulted in 2 rebellions. Parliament. So, of course, one of the reasons Henry did not want to use parliamentary grants, yeah, it's not a pure weak, but also Parliament's like, yeah, of course, I'll give you the money if you give us something in return. And Henry's like, no. So that's why he avoided it as much as he could. But he still asked for grants. In 1487, he asked one for the Battle of Stoke. In 1489, he asked it to pay for a war against France. And in 1496, he asked for more grants against the Warbeck Rebellion and the Cornish Rebellion. And this parliamentary grant was a tax based on the person's movable goods. Now, what is a movable good? Well, so the economy, this is finance. Okay, there's a difference, and I always get them mixed up, but if I'm not mistaken, economy is the country, like how the country's doing, trade, trade, agriculture, industry, that deal. Finance, which is what I just said, is more personal crown revenue, parliament, that which involves institutions, so tax, attainders, bonds, that kind of deal. This is economy. So that's the economy. Yeah. Well, first is the trade with the Netherlands. The Netherlands, they had Antwerp, the most famous port, which would later go into close in 1555, but by 1485, it was a significant port. Well, merchant adventurers dominated trade with Antwerp. Under Henry VII, imports went up, exports were by, I think it went up by 60%. 60%. How? How did exports go up by 60%? And 80% of these, you get this, it was cloth. Cloth was a huge deal. A huge deal back then. The negatives were that Henry VII, he increased focus in dynastic security. So, yeah, he fomented trade, like I said before, but not that strongly, sadly. Well, Margaret of Burgundy, if you remember her, she presented quite a bit of a problem. After all, she was Richard III's mother. Or sister. Sister. So, of course, she would oppose whatever Henry did. So she would stop any trade with Burgundy. After all, her son Maximilian was Holy Roman Emperor. So she had a bit of say in this. And there was a cut-off of trade in 1494, which is the I forgot the name. I know there's a name. Something Malus. Anyway, it's that. I'm going to talk about it in my foreign policy video, but by 1494, all trade is cut off. Yeah, that was with the Netherlands, and elsewhere. There was some coal trade with Germany, and then the Treaty of Medina del Campo encouraged Spanish trade. But again, the Treaty of Medina del Campo is in foreign policy, so I'm not really going to get into that right now. However, again, Henry was more focused on dynastic threats rather than trade. He made a bad deal with the Hanseatic League to stop the Earl of Suffolk, which ended up undermining England. This Hanseatic League was a trade group. So again, foreign policy, don't worry about it. But yeah. Then industry. So the coal, tin, and mining industry were there, but the cloth industry was the biggest by far, which eventually it carried these industries. They needed coal for fun, like I don't know why they needed coal, but it would end up carrying all the other industries. So the leading one was in fact cloth. However, it was small scale and the king did not personally invest in it that much. So it wasn't really a prosperous time for the industry. And just as, like I said, France was superior in economy, Germany had an amazing industry. So that was that. Then sorry about that. Then agriculture. Mainly sheep farming for wool, obviously, which would link to cloth. So as you can see, by fermenting cloth, it would also ferment the farming industry. But crop farming and then food prices went up. So not that good. And living standards in the middle class kind of increased. I mean, the wealthy farmers selling wool, wealthy farmers, they sold some wool, merchants sold some other goods. And however, in the lower classes, not that good, because there was enclosure, there was bad harvest, and food prices rose. So that's Henry VII economy. That's it. Now, again, the title of this video is not Economy under Henry VII. Was Henry VII a miser king? So, in other words, was Henry VII a king obsessed with finances and only spent money on absolutely necessary? No, I don't think so. Personally, I think he was not worried about finances. I think he was worried by dynastic threats. So he was not a miser king. However, he was a king obsessed with preserving his rule. So, yeah, he spent a lot of money to this. He really didn't promote that much trade. Some of it, yeah. But he was a bit picky. He controlled the nobles. So, yeah, you can put that to miser king, but also to protecting his dynasty. And also, when he needed to be, he was extravagant. His coronation ceremony was huge. His marriage was huge. His castles were huge. So, yeah, whenever it was necessary, he did spend the money. So, yeah, it was not that he was a miser king, it's just he was really careful as to what he spent things on. He did not plunge the country into economic chaos by only spending money on this and spending money on that. No, he was kind of careful. But I wouldn't say he was a miser king. Anyway, that's pretty much it. I don't think there's anything else. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it and thank you for watching.